If your tomato transplants just sit there after planting, looking pale, tired, and stubborn for 2 or 3 weeks, the problem may not be the weather, and it may not be the plant. A lot of the time, the problem starts right in the planting hole. Some gardeners plant tomatoes in plain, tired soil and hope for the best. Others go the other direction and throw in everything they have in the shed: compost, fertilizer, eggshells, wood ash, coffee grounds, Epsom salt, bone meal, and whatever else they saw online last night. But tomatoes do not need a magic potion in the hole. They need a good start. Today I want to show you a simple way to plant tomatoes so they settle in faster, handle transplant shock better, and start growing without all that drama. But before we get into it, let me say this clearly. Not every garden needs the same thing. If your soil is already rich, loose, full of organic matter, and your tomatoes always take off just fine, you may not need to add phosphorus to the planting hole at all. In fact, in many parts of the United States, especially where runoff is a concern, you want to be careful with phosphorus fertilizers. A soil test is always the best guide. Your local extension office can tell you what your soil actually needs. So do not treat this like a rule for every single garden. Think of it as a practical option for average backyard soil, especially soil that is a little tired, low in nutrients, sandy, heavy clay, or in a newer garden bed that has not been built up yet. For a basic tomato planting hole, I like to use about 1 tablespoon of a phosphorus starter fertilizer, such as plain superphosphate, only if the soil needs it. The important part is not just what you put in the hole. The important part is how you put it in. This is where a lot of people mess it up. They hear, add a tablespoon, and that is the only part they remember. So they dig a hole, dump the fertilizer in the bottom, set the tomato roots right on top of it, cover everything up, and think they helped the plant. But that is not helping. That can stress the roots. A tomato transplant does not need to sit directly on a little pile of fertilizer. That is too concentrated. The goal is to mix the amendment into the soil so the roots can find it gradually as they grow. When you plant a tomato, the first job is not to grow a giant leafy plant overnight. The first job is to get the roots settled. The plant has just been moved from a pot into the garden. It may be dealing with wind, sun, cooler nights, hotter afternoons, or completely different soil. That is a lot for a young plant. If the roots settle in quickly, the whole plant behaves better. It wilts less, yellows less, and starts growing with more confidence. But if you put fertilizer in a clump and plant directly on top of it, you can create the opposite effect. Instead of giving the plant a smooth start, you create a stressful little hot spot right under the roots. So here is the simple way to do it. First, dig a good planting hole. Not a tiny hole just big enough to shove the root ball into. Give the plant some room. If your tomato seedling is tall and a little stretched, plan for that before you plant. Tomatoes can usually be planted deeper than they were in the pot because they can form roots along the buried part of the stem. But do not turn planting into a circus. You do not need to twist the stem into loops or do some complicated trick just because you saw it online. Plant it deeper if it makes sense, but keep it simple. Next, add 1 tablespoon of the phosphorus starter. 1 tablespoon, not 3, not a big scoop, not a handful because you feel generous. 1 tablespoon is plenty as a starter amount for an average planting hole. Then, mix it with the soil in the hole. This is the step that matters. Do not leave it sitting in a pile. Blend it into the native soil at the bottom and around the lower part of the planting hole. You want the amendment spread out, not concentrated in one spot. After that, set the tomato transplant in place. If the plant is sturdy and compact, plant it normally. If it is a little leggy but still healthy, you can plant it deeper and remove the lower leaves that would be buried. Keep the top of the plant above ground and give the stem good contact with the soil. Then, backfill the hole. Press the soil gently around the plant. Do not stomp it down. You just want good contact between the roots and the soil so there are no big air pockets. Then water it in well. Not a swamp, not a mud pit. Just a good, deep watering to settle the soil around the roots. That is the whole basic system. Dig the hole, add 1 tablespoon if your soil needs that starter phosphorus, mix it into the soil. Plant the tomato, water it in, then let the plant settle. Now, let us talk about what not to put in the planting hole, because, honestly, a lot of tomato problems do not come from gardeners doing too little, they come from gardeners doing too much. Do not turn the planting hole into a compost bin. Do not dump in fertilizer, wood ash, eggshells, coffee grounds, fresh manure, random kitchen scraps, and 5 different products from the garage. That is not a planting hole anymore. That is a science experiment. Tomatoes need a balanced start, not every garden hack in one spot. Be especially careful with wood ash. In some gardens it has a place, but it can raise soil pH, and many gardeners already have soil that is not ideal for adding ash. If you do not know your soil pH, do not throw ash in the hole just because somebody said it helped their tomatoes. Also, do not use fresh manure in the planting hole. That is an old mistake, and it still shows up everywhere. Fresh manure can be too strong. It can burn roots, and it can create more problems than it solves. If you use manure in the garden, it should be well aged or properly composted. And even then, it is usually better worked into the bed ahead of time, not packed right under a tomato transplant. And do not think a perfect planting hole can rescue a weak plant. This is important. If your tomato seedling is already pale, stretched thin, root-bound, dried out, or half dead, 1 tablespoon of anything in the hole will not magically turn it into a strong plant. A good planting hole helps a healthy transplant get started. It does not perform miracles. Start with the best seedlings you can. Sturdy stem, healthy green leaves, no major yellowing, no pest damage, no rotten smell in the root ball. That matters more than any trick you add to the hole. Now here is the big mistake people make after planting. They do the planting part right, and then they ruin it by fussing too much. They plant the tomato. They water it in. Everything is fine. Then the next morning, they are out there watering again because they are worried. The day after that, they add a liquid fertilizer, then maybe a booster, then maybe a foliar spray. Then they start poking around the soil to see what is happening. Meanwhile, the tomato is just trying to settle in. Here is the truth. The planting hole is only the start. It is not the whole life of the plant. Once the tomato is planted and watered in, give it a little time. Do not dig around the roots. Do not keep soaking the soil every day unless the weather and your soil actually call for it. Do not start feeding again before the plant has even had a chance to establish. In cooler regions, like parts of the Midwest, New England, or the Pacific Northwest, tomatoes may sit still if the soil is still cold. That does not always mean they need more fertilizer. Sometimes they just need warmer soil and steadier weather. In hot southern climates, the issue can be the opposite. A new transplant may struggle because the afternoon sun is intense. In that case, planting in the evening, watering deeply, and giving the plant a little temporary shade can help more than extra fertilizer. In dry western gardens, watering matters a lot, but watering every day is not always the answer. You want moisture around the root zone, not soggy soil all the time. In humid areas, too much water and poor airflow can create disease problems fast. That is why tomato care has to match your climate. But the basic idea stays the same. Give the plant a clean, balanced start. Then, do not smother it with attention. After transplanting, A tomato often needs a few days to adjust. It may not explode with new growth the next morning. That is normal. Do not panic. Do not decide something is wrong and start pouring more products on it. Watch the plant. Watch the weather. Check the soil moisture with your finger. If the soil is still moist a couple of inches down, you probably do not need to water again yet. The goal is not to keep the plant constantly wet. The goal is to help the roots grow out into the surrounding soil. That is how the plant becomes strong. So here is the simple version. If your soil is average and a soil test or your garden experience tells you it could use a phosphorus boost, add 1 tablespoon of a phosphorus starter like superphosphate to the tomato planting hole. Mix it well with the soil. Do not leave it in a pile. Plant the tomato calmly and properly. Water it in. Then give it time to settle. Do not turn the hole into a dump for every folk remedy you have ever heard of. Do not overfeed. Do not overwater. Do not panic because the plant did not double in size overnight. A simple, well-prepared planting hole often does more good than 5 random additives thrown together. And remember, if your soil is already healthy and your tomatoes grow well every year, you may not need this at all. Keep doing what works. Gardening is not about following rituals. It is about understanding what the plant actually needs. So tell me in the comments, what do you usually put in the planting hole when you transplant tomatoes? Do you use a starter fertilizer, compost, bone meal, nothing at all, or do you have your own method that works in your garden? I would really like to hear what works for you in your climate. And make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the next practical gardening tips.